Please have a seat, ladies and gentlemen. And welcome back from the tea break. Our next topic is compliance. So far we've heard a lot about rules and regulations, but it's obvious, of course, that these rules must also be followed, which naturally can be a challenge. Fortunately, solutions are available. Here to discuss compliance challenges, as well localized solutions, are Jochen Biewer, who is Managing Director at Chevron Compliance Solutions. Antonio Zanghi was on the program, but unfortunately for personal reasons he could not join us today. We've Rayissa Manning Armata, who's Head of Regulatory Affairs at IDnow. And this session will be moderated, very pleased, by David Altenar, a long-term business journalist at VIXIO, Gambling Compliance. Please, speakers, make it to the stage. Welcome. I think we are quite eager to hear about challenges of being compliant with Germany's online gambling regulation and what we can do to make it happen. So David, if you can sit here, that'd be great. Thank you and welcome. David, the floor is yours.
So we've heard a lot about how complicated everything is in Germany, so let's try to get down to some of the details. In general, what are the biggest areas in which there's compliance challenges for operators that are licensed in Germany?
I would say there are. Is it working? Yes. In general, you have three areas which are different to most of the regulations in Europe. One area is AML, which also the KYC process is very important and different to other jurisdictions than responsible gambling, which is in Germany a large portion of the regulation. And then you have data protection, which we heard in the last session that Ludas is questioned if it's GDPR compliant. And there are some interesting requirements in AML, especially for Maltese operators not holding a license yet, so virtual slot machines operators operating on the German market under the Maltese license. But being on the German market would be compliant with both regulations. So they need to be compliant with the Maltese regulations and the German AML regulation. And there are some interesting checks which needs to be done, which are different, and there are different thresholds in Malta and in Germany, like the PEP and sanction check needs to be done at registration in Germany, and in Malta there's a 180 days rolling threshold of €2,000, and this would trigger the PEP check. The sanction check needs to be done at registration as well. So to be compliant with the German regulation, the operators need to be over compliant in Malta.
Rayissa, do you have thoughts on that?
Does this work? Okay. I fully agree with you. It is a complex process, and throughout the last 2 days we've been talking about adapting, understanding the process here in Germany. And while it is a challenge at times, I think there are there's an upside to seeing how some of these pain points can be addressed with service providers, like IDnow is a service provider, and other vendors on the market, specifically for the Know Your Customer and the AML regulations that need to be followed according to German law. It's a very small sentence that's written in the German Anti-Money Laundering Act, so it's easy to miss. I think we've experienced that with some of our banking customers as well, who are used to being able to passport many of their license requirements to other countries. And I think the gaming operators probably face some of those similar issues, being able to sort of take the licensing accomplishments that they've received, for example, in Malta or Gibraltar, and bring that to Germany, and that's not quite the case.
I imagine there's a number of operators that were operating in Germany with their Malta license, what are some of the other areas that they're going to have to adjust quickly, or maybe they've already started adjusting?
So from the KYC process, so what we would call in Malta full KYC process, so that you identify fully the player. This needs to be done in Germany after at registration, and in Malta it's also the famous 2,000 euro 180 days threshold. So the requirements in Germany are much more likely in the banking sector than for gambling, which is, I would say, representing a lower AML risk, because with a 1,000 euro deposit limit, the AML risk is of course lowered. Money laundering is always related to large amounts of cash, especially, and with a 1,000 euro limit, it's impossible to launder larger amounts, especially in cash. The second area, which is now quite different to Malta, but also to other jurisdictions, is that in Malta, since this year, there is no responsible gambling officer position anymore. It was introduced in 2018 in the last renewal of the requirements, but since this year there is no legal requirement anymore to have someone who is trained and who is able to fulfill the position of being responsible, the responsible person within the operator for responsible gambling. And in Germany, we have even two positions. We have someone on a management level who is responsible for the responsible gambling concept, and we have someone who is responsible for the day-by-day operation. The person who is responsible on the day-by-day operation needs to be German-speaking and trained according to certain requirements. At the moment, the requirements for online operators are not totally clear, but for the retail land-based sports betting operators, there are requirements, even different requirements in each Bundesland. So you have very high requirements in North Rhine-Westphalia, and other Bundesländer are more modern. They allow hybrid trainings, so partially e-learnings and face-to-face trainings.
Rayissa?
Well, I think I would add that there is some good news or silver lining to all these requirements. The German Anti-Money Laundering Act specifically has an article that references online gaming. And in that, it refers to be in accordance with the gaming treaty. And so there's a solution for everyone who needs to fulfill their know your customer obligations. The online gaming treaty, or that part of it, works with the Youth Protection Ministry, which is short for KJM here in Germany. And they provide the technical guidelines for vendors like us who offer the KYC solutions. So when we talk to our gaming operators and provide that type of solution, we've been approved by a Youth Protection Ministry to offer a proper KYC that fits according to the German requirements and German law.
Are there other countries, European countries, that you can think of that are as strict about requirements at registration?
In some countries, you have a KYC process which make it much easier to identify players, like in the Nordics. You have like Bank ID, a system where almost everyone is registered, and then you can use like a password and or an ID and a password to register, and you are fully identified. In most of the European countries, it's possible to upload documents, and then the documents can be checked manually, and this is sufficient according to the AML requirements. In Germany, the process needs to be fully electronically, and you need to access different databases for example, you can use IDnow, which is already fully compliant, also to identify the age of the player, which is actually one of the most important requirements of the KJM. but then you need to identify also the owner of the payment method, which is not that easy because there is no central database in outside of the UK of holders of credit cards. So the only solution is to take a photograph of the credit card and then compare the credit card number and the name on the credit card with the name of the player, which is causing PCI DSS issues. And they are only, and it is in Germany, although it's part of the AML regulation, the regulator was not that strict on that part, but this might come in the future.
So for the player who's trying to register, how seamless or how intrusive is it going to be? Is the operator doing all the work, or is the player having to come up with a lot of documents before they can do anything?
Well, one document is required. The systems, on a high-level basis, capture the ID document to see name, date of birth, to do the age requirement or age verification, and then a liveness through either a video or selfie is done to match the user to the picture on the ID card to make sure that they're one and the same person. So that part of the process is pretty seamless. But as Jochen was explaining, there are other processes and parts to this customer due diligence journey that the operators are required to fulfill that obviously takes more time.
One KYC process which is available technically and to every German holding a German identity card is the eID KYC process, so that you have a device or your mobile phone and you can read the data through NFC and then you enter a PIN and licensed service providers, they can then read the data from the chip on the identity card. Also, IDnow is capable to do so. Yep. But at the moment, most of the Germans, they don't have their PIN at hand. So,
or activated.
or not activated. Now there was a change also that now the new identity cards, they have always the eID chip activated, and you need to apply to be deactivated. In the past, it was the other way around.
That's right.
And so we hope that this will become more popular than it is at the moment.
Is the registration process complicated enough that it'll deter some people or scare them off, to put them off to offshore, or is it?
This is
hard to tell.
Well, we know from our past, because we are also providing in outsourcing the positions of the MROs to gaming operators, and we know that a lot, especially of the VIP players, that they stop playing as soon as they need to identify fully or they need to provide a source of wealth document. And so VIP players will not be attracted by the German regulation at the moment because of the deposit limit until the end of this year. But I'm quite sure that the pretty hard requirements that they will push some of the players into the gray or black market.
What are some of the specifics that are going to come up with responsible gambling requirements that aren't common in other markets or that aren't required with somebody who just has a multi-license?
In several jurisdictions, there are now requirements to have an electronic monitoring system. Like Spain introduced at the 1st of July the first thresholds to identify or to classify certain behavior, and there is just a start in Spain, so that they thought about not allowing players who are losing more than 3,600 euro within 3 weeks to use a credit card, because they could play on credit with the credit card. And so Spain was, as far as I know, the first regulator introducing thresholds. But there is a requirement now in more and more jurisdictions to have an electronic monitoring system. And the electronic monitoring system for responsible gambling is very similar to the ones which are required by law, by the Fourth AML Directive, and also by law in most of the AML acts in Europe. That you have an electronic monitoring system monitoring transaction according to AML requirements, and the triggers. They are very similar, but the thresholds are different. So, for example, it can be if someone is losing, not depositing, is losing 5,000 euro per month, then this could be an RG case, not an AML case, but if someone is depositing more than 1,000 euro, for example, or is playing at night at unusual times, this could be both. It could be AML and RG related. So you have similar KPIs, similar algorithms, but the values are different. AML is a higher value and RG is a lower one.
Can you talk about under what circumstances can operators deviate from the mandatory deposit limits and when they start?
At the moment, it's more guessing because there was a regulation in the past for horse racing, for horse betting, and it was possible for horse betting operators to raise the limit in several stages, and also the first stage from 1,000 euro to the next stage was quite easy, but just by an application of the player. But you need to be sure that the raise of the limit is not RG related, not AML related, and you need to find a way to prove the affordability so that a player can afford actually to raise the limit. And there are some solutions now discussed on the German market. One is the Schufa tradability check, which is like just a more simple consumer check, which you would go through if you want to buy a TV and on a credit, then apply for a credit when you buy a TV. So it's a similar process. And then more processes which are going deeper into actually financials of the player are account information service providers. They can have access according to the PSD2 to the bank accounts and retrieve 180 days of transactions from bank accounts. And fintech systems is, for example, one provider, or Fin API from Schufa, or Neos from Griff. They all have the special CS license as account information service provider, and they can create reports on the transactions on the bank account, and then prove that there is more money or enough money on the bank account left at the end of the month, so to say, that the player can afford a higher limit.
So again, is the operator? Is this all happening behind the scenes with the operator, or is the player being asked to offer information that they might consider intrusive?
It's actually the player. If it's an account information service, then the player would give access to this service, full access to the bank account. Is
it a box to tick, or what is it?
It's actually like you need to enter at 10, like if you would perform a transaction on your bank account, and then you give access to the AISP, the account information service provider, access to your bank account. Right. And another solution would be, for example, also Sofort ID from Sofort. They do something similar. It's more like screen scraping, and in future they might be able also to retrieve the information electronically. But you need to give access to these providers to your bank account, and then they can retrieve all the account transactions, but also the details about the person being the client's information, the client's details of which are stored with the bank.
as we've talked about also at this conference, the table games, online table games, are going to be state by state. And so far only 2 states have come forward with saying they're going to allow licensing. Can you talk about some of the complications associated as we get closer to that?
Bandholder games or table games at the moment only allowed to land-based casinos, and some of the or the amount of licensees is the same as the amount of land-based casinos in a certain Bundesland, certain state. And some of the casinos they do not operate the license. So in Schleswig-Holstein, it's now an open tender that everyone can apply, but it's very unlikely that everyone is in a position to receive a license or a license to be granted to everyone, because the requirements are almost impossible to be fulfilled by Maltese operators. One of the requirements in the licensed tender in Schleswig-Holstein is that the live games need to happen in licensed premises on German soil. And this can only be done in licensed casinos. So it looks like that the application is tailor-made for certain potential licensees.
So in Schleswig-Holstein, at least, only somebody who either owns a casino or partners with a casino will be able to bid for the table games license.
And one of the requirements is to have a broad variety of games. Applicants who would offer the full variety of games, they would rather receive a license than the ones who can only offer a smaller version of the full game. So if an operator from Malta would not be able to offer live games, then someone who would be able to offer live games would receive the license.
What do we know about North Rhine-Westphalia?
At the moment, to my knowledge, there's no officially presented any kind of tender. So we need to see when this will happen and what the requirements are.
So they have 5 licenses available. Is anybody going to be able to bid on them? Or who's going to be able to bid on them?
I think a lot of I know that some of the operators applying in Schleswig-Holstein, that they try their best to fulfill the requirements, but they might not be in a position, for example, to offer live games. So I would think that some of the operators might file a court case if they have no chance to be in line with the requirements of the license tender.
Huh. Well, we talked about how complicated compliance is and how presumably costly it is. But what can the operator who does comply get out of it?
I think that has been a great examples have come from the audience and speakers here who've been discussing operating in a licensed environment. From my perspective as working in the regulatory department, we see as our company offers a platform of solutions for Know Your Customer, for the remote and on-site verifications. And what we've been discussing, each member state here in Europe has a little variation on what the requirements are for licensing or what the AML laws are. So it's confusing to sort of navigate this whole European landscape here. But one of the things that we see where there will be more of a unified way of moving forward is in digitization. The European Union announced that in in the near future, there will be access to a digital identity. Your identity will be stored on your phone in a wallet. And with this wallet, you will be able to access public and private services through being identified and then authentication. We see already that there's certain sectors where this would be very viable. The gaming sector, people don't want to have to identify themselves or prove their age every time they join a game. So a solution that could offer something where you have a digital identity and you can be authenticated to use again is something that we've been working on. The Youth Protection Ministry has approved our idea and product. So these are exciting developments that will obviously in time be more sophisticated. There will be payment applications that will be allowed, and all of this is being worked out at member state levels, at the EU level. But from a software company that's involved in technology, this online gaming is, the speakers were talking about new versions of games and new applications are part of that process. So that's exciting.
Last week I was at a Kindred market day in London, and they were telling the analysts that, well, we're profitable in the UK, and the UK regulations keep getting tougher and tougher. And if we can make money in the UK, we can do it in North America. And they actually had this sign. They didn't play the song, apparently, because they'd have to pay royalties. But they were like, if we can make it here, we can make it anywhere. And so if you can, in the future, a couple of years from now, will people be saying, if I can make it in Germany, I can make it anywhere? Or is it too narrow and specific to be able to be applicable to other appealing regulated markets?
I would say, maybe also to answer to your last question, that what are the benefits to operators to be compliant? Well, one benefit is, of course, that you keep your license. Then you are able to operate in a certain market. And Germany is, just by the sheer amount of people living in Germany, it's the largest market in Europe. So it's of interest of the operators who have a license to keep the license. Then in compliance means that the value of a company, when you want to sell the company or you have maybe an IPO, then in compliance would mean that the value is reduced of the company, and then compliance will protect the operators to be sued by players. And what we see now in Austria or also in Germany or in Malta from German players, that they are suing the operators, and the operators need to pay back the deposits. In Austria, especially with online casino, this is very common, and so some of the operators pulled out of the market already. So protection of the margin, protection of the value of the company, and at the end protection of the license. And when it comes to AML, it's also protection of the management against potential fines or even criminal actions taken against the management if they fail with AML requirements.
Just going back to table games for a second. They're only going to be available in North Rhine-Westphalia and Schleswig-Holstein and possibly a couple more. But North Rhine-Westphalia is has more people than the Netherlands and more people than Austria. Is that attractive, or is it too complicated to meet? Is it going to be too complicated to meet the standards?
It's because there are only a couple of licenses available. It can be attractive for an existing operator to add these games to its already existing offer. So when someone is offering already slot machines, then it's attractive to add bank holder games to the offering. I think that just applying for a bandholder games license is not that attractive because you can see it for example, in Malta that the Maltese operators offering slot machines and bandholder games, that they made most of the money from the slot machines, not from the bandholder games. So finding players who are just interested in bandholder games like roulette or baccarat or so, this is much harder than finding people who are enjoying slot machines.
Interesting. Well, let's open it up for questions from the audience.
Exactly. So again, we have some questions in Slido. If somebody would like to ask a question in person here, please raise your hand and we will send a microphone your way, but nothing here. So I think we have 2 questions in Slido that are relevant to most of us here. Are the affordability requirements for raising deposit limits recorded in regulation?
No. At the moment, it's as we heard with the at the Ludas panel that we are waiting now to come, that the regulator is coming up with a process which would allow the raise of the limits.
Good, I guess so that was for a few people here. And then we have a second question here in Slido. Let's have a look. International sanction compliance. We should review whether their players are not placed on sanction lists outside of the initial check. How regular? So we spoke about PEPs and sanction before, but how regular should these checks be? Sure, at onboarding and on an ongoing basis?
Actually, it comes not from the gambling regulation. It comes from general law that companies are not allowed to enter into a business relation with people on a sanction list. And so, if you have subscribed to the update of the sanction board in Malta, you get every week a new list of people placed on sanction lists, and even not just people, also countries. So normally, you should at least check your active players. You don't have to check your whole database, but you should check your active players. These days, now with the war and everything, on a regular basis, maybe every month or every quarter. The banks, they are doing it as much as they can.
Anything to add, Rayissa?
I agree.
Great, agree. So if we all agree, that's a wonderful moment to close this panel. Rayissa, Jochen, David, thank you very much for joining us on stage, and thank you for sharing your expertise.